Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are diving into de-extinction. And picture this for a second.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It is April of 2025, and you're in this highly secure laboratory. And a pup takes its very first, shaky breath.
Right.
But this isn't just a stray dog. This is like a massive apex predator. We're talking bone-crushing jaws. And the crazy thing is, it hasn't actually walked the Earth since the Ice Age.
It really is staggering to think about.
It's wild. So today, we're sorting through this absolute mountain of research. We've got scientific journals, corporate filings, biological blueprints, and the mission today is to figure out if this is all just science fiction or if bringing back extinct animals is, our actual new reality.
And looking at the sources, it's definitely becoming our reality, and it forces this complete rethinking of how we interact with the natural world.
How so?
Well, for generations, conservation has been fundamentally defensive.
Right.
We put up fences, we write laws, we try desperately to save whatever tiny fragments of wild nature we haven't already paved over.
Yeah, just trying to stop things from dying out completely.
Exactly. But taking a 10,000-year-old extinct wolf and forcing it back into existence, that is an offensive maneuver. We are transitioning from just protecting the wild to actively engineering it.
Which, I know, the instant we say engineering extinct predators, everyone listening immediately jumps to a certain movie. You know the one.
Oh, absolutely. The theme park on an island.
Right, where everything goes catastrophically wrong and people get eaten on the toilet. But we are going to keep this completely grounded today.
Because the reality is actually much more methodical than that.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't need a PhD in biology to follow along today. We're going to break down the mechanics of resurrection using everyday concepts. Like, if you were in 8th grade, you'd get this. No confusing jargon, no alphabet soup.
Just the step-by-step reality of how a creature comes back from the dead.
Right. And to understand how we got to breathing Ice Age wolves, we kind of have to start with the oldest trick in the book, which doesn't even involve test tubes at all.
No, it doesn't. It relies on selective breeding. Biologists call it backbreeding.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in plain English?
So the core idea here is that extinction doesn't necessarily erase an animal's entire biological footprint.
Like they leave behind clues.
Better than clues. Even though a specific animal is gone, fragments of its unique traits are still hiding. They're just dormant in the family tree of its modern living cousins.
Oh, I see. Let me see if I have this straight. It's like looking at a massive family tree, and you realize your great-great-grandfather had this very specific bright red beard.
Okay, yeah.
And you notice that a few distant cousins today still have like a reddish tint to their stubble. It's not the full beard, but the instruction manual to grow it is still somewhere in the family.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The instructions are still floating around in the gene pool. If you look at the historical data, a classic example of this is the quagga.
The quagga, that's a fun word to say. What is that?
It was this really unique type of zebra. But instead of having high contrast black and white stripes all over its entire body, it only had stripes on its front half.
Wait, really? Just the front?
It's just the front. Its back half was this solid sandy brown color. It looked almost like two different animals stitched together, but hunters wiped them out entirely by 1883.
Wow. Okay, so they're totally gone.
All right. But jump forward a century to the 1980s, and researchers start analyzing the plains zebra, which is their close living relative. And they realized the quagga wasn't some totally alien, separate thing. It was basically just a regional variation of the plains zebra.
So the instructions to build a quagga were still hiding inside the modern zebra population.
Precisely. So researchers went out and found modern zebras that naturally had, slightly faded stripes on their hindquarters, and they bred those specific zebras together.
Let me guess. The babies had even fewer stripes.
Exactly. They looked at the offspring, found the ones with the fewest stripes, and bred them again. They just repeated this process generation after generation, amplifying that specific hidden trait.
That's amazing.
By 2005, they literally had herds of animals walking around South Africa that look virtually identical to the original extinct quagga.
That is so cool. And there's a similar project happening in Europe right now too, right? With something called the aurochs.
Yes, the aurochs. They are the wild ancestors of all modern domestic cattle.
I read they were these terrifying, gigantic wild cows with massive forward-facing horns. And they went extinct in the 1600s, I think.
Yeah, they were legendary for their aggression. You can actually find them painted on the walls of prehistoric caves. across Europe. And today, a project is actively crossbreeding the most rugged, muscular, aggressive modern cattle they can find to recreate that exact prehistoric beast.
Okay, let's pause on that for a second, because we really need to clarify what is actually happening under the hood here.
It's an important distinction to make.
Right, because, to use an analogy, it's like if wild wolves went entirely extinct and all humanity had left were domestic dogs.
Okay, tracking with you?
We could take huskies and malamutes and over decades keep breeding the ones with the prettiest ears, the longest snouts, and the grayest coats.
Right, amplifying those wolf-like traits.
Exactly. And eventually we would produce a dog that looks exactly like a wild timber wolf. It looks the part, it probably howls the part, but if you open up the instruction manual inside its cells, it is still undeniably a domestic dog.
Yes, that distinction is absolutely vital. Backbreeding creates a visual and functional look-alike. It is a vintage exterior wrapped around a modern engine.
A vintage exterior, right?
You aren't reaching back into the past and pulling the original creature forward. You are just molding the present to look like the past.
Which is cool, but it's kind of a cheat code.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you want to achieve true genetic resurrection, you have to move to the second method, which is cloning.
Ah, yes. The photocopy method. Taking an intact, perfectly preserved cell from an extinct animal, scooping out the core of that cell, and dropping it into the empty egg of a modern relative.
Which sounds simple, but it is incredibly complex.
I mean, everyone remembers Dolly the sheep from the 90s, right? That proved you could photocopy a living mammal.
Yeah.
But applying that to something that is already dead is a completely different nightmare.
It is. And the research highlights a profoundly tragic milestone from 2003 regarding an animal called the Pyrenean ibex.
I've never actually heard of that one before reading the sources.
It was this magnificent wild goat native to the harsh mountains of Spain. It was known for these sweeping, heavily ridged horns, but the very last of its kind was a female named Celia.
Celia, okay.
And sadly, she was killed by a falling tree in the year 2000.
Oh man, what a way for a whole species to go out.
Truly terrible luck. But before she died, wildlife veterinarians actually managed to take a small biopsy of her skin cells and plunge them into a deep freeze.
So they essentially preserved the perfect original master document before the species totally vanished.
They did. And 3 years later, in 2003, scientists took one of Celia's frozen cells. They extracted its core, which contains her entire biological instruction manual, and injected it into the egg of a modern domestic goat.
Okay, so the domestic goat is the surrogate mother.
Right. They implanted that egg. And against all odds, the surrogate actually carried it to term. For the very first time in human history, an extinct animal was successfully brought back to life.
Which sounds like this massive victory, but reading through the accounts of that day in the lab, it really didn't end in celebration.
No, it ended in heartbreak, unfortunately. The cloned ibex lived for exactly 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Just wow.
It struggled for breath from the exact moment it was born, and it ultimately suffocated due to severe physical deformities in its lungs.
That is so awful.
It was. An entire species came back from the void, gasped for air for 7 minutes, and went extinct all over again.
Which really begs the question, why did it fail so catastrophically? Like, if they had the original cell, the master document, why didn't the photocopy come out clean?
It all comes down to what actually happens to an animal's blueprint when a living thing dies.
Yeah.
We tend to think of freezing as this magical pause button.
Right, like Han Solo and carbonite.
Exactly. But biological material is incredibly fragile. The moment an animal dies, its biological blueprint begins to degrade. Even locked in ice, things like cosmic radiation and just natural chemical breakdown cause that instruction manual to shatter into millions of microscopic fragments.
Ah, I see. So to stick with our office supplies analogy, you can't run a shredded document through a photocopy machine.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. If you feed a shredded blueprint into the biological photocopy machine of a surrogate egg, the machinery just jams.
You can't read the pages.
Right. It misreads the instructions, it skips crucial steps in organ development, and the result is catastrophic physical defects, like the lungs of the Pyrenean ibex.
So the shredded document problem kind of ruins everything.
It completely kills the Jurassic Park fantasy, yes. We are never cloning dinosaurs because their blueprints have been rotting for 65 million years. There is no biological material left, just mineralized rock.
So no T-Rex.
Got it. No T-Rex. And even for a woolly mammoth that has been perfectly frozen in the Siberian permafrost for 10,000 years, it's useless for pure cloning. The document is just too shredded.
Which brings us to the third method. And this is where the massive modern breakthrough actually lies. This is the thing driving billions of dollars into biotech right now. Let's call this the cut and paste method.
This completely changes the game. Because the mammoth's ancient instruction manual is too shredded to photocopy, scientists are taking a completely different approach.
Okay, how does it work?
They start with the pristine, fully intact instruction manual of a living animal, specifically the Asian elephant.
Why the Asian elephant?
Because it shares about 99.6% of its biological blueprint with the woolly mammoth.
Oh, wow. So they were essentially the same base model.
Very close. So scientists map the Asian elephant's manual page by page. Then they use microscopic tools.
The sources call these tools molecular scissors.
Right. Yes, molecular scissors. They use them to literally cut out certain modern tropical traits from the elephant's manual. They then take the legible fragments they can read from the shredded mammoth blueprint and paste those ancient instructions into the empty spaces.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. So they're only pasting in the specific traits that made a mammoth a mammoth.
Exactly right.
Like the instructions for the shaggy double coat of hair, the thick insulating layers of brown fat, and that unique hemoglobin in their blood that acts like antifreeze in sub-zero temperatures.
Yes. They aren't trying to rebuild a woolly mammoth from scratch. That's impossible. They are taking a modern tropical elephant and biologically retrofitting it with the tools it needs to survive a Siberian winter.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second. Because if we were just cutting and pasting ancient traits into a modern elephant, we aren't actually bringing back the woolly mammoth.
That's a fair criticism.
I mean, the woolly mammoth is still extinct.
Sure.
What we are making is a heavily engineered hybrid. Think about a modern Honda Civic.
Okay, a Honda Civic.
If I take off the exterior panels and I drop a roaring V8 engine under the hood and I slap on massive vintage tires until it looks, sounds, and drives exactly like a 1960s Mustang.
I see where you're going.
Like, it might be the coolest car on the road, but the chassis underneath is still a Honda Civic. It's not a resurrection. It's a proxy.
And if you look closely at the corporate language and the scientific papers in our sources, they openly concede that exact point.
Oh, they do?
Yes. They are not trying to create a perfect museum replica. The stated goal is to build a functional proxy, a living, breathing creature that can do the job of a mammoth in the wild.
So it's more about the function than the purity of it.
Exactly. The philosophical debate over whether this animal is a real mammoth or a biological chimera is fascinating. But the biotech companies are moving way too fast to wait for philosophers to catch up.
The speed is truly staggering. So let's move out of the theoretical classroom here and look at who is actually in the lab right now doing this.
There are a few players, but one big one.
Yeah, the undisputed heavyweight in this arena is a Dallas-based company called Colossal Biosciences. I mean, they have raised over $615 million from venture capitalists, and their flagship project is this elephant-mammoth hybrid.
Colossal is treating de-extinction like a Silicon Valley engineering problem, and they are already producing physical results. For instance, in 2025, they successfully engineered what they are calling woolly mice.
Okay, I had to read that part of the research 3 times when I saw it. They literally pasted mammoth genes into lab mice.
They did. To prove that their molecular scissors could actually transfer cold weather traits successfully, they pasted the mammoth instructions for shaggy hair and altered cold weather biology into the embryos of standard lab mice.
That is just wild.
And it worked. The result was a generation of mice that were physically adapted to the cold using ancient mammoth genetics. It was a massive proof of concept that validated their entire approach.
And their timeline is aggressive, right?
Very. Their stated public goal is to have the very first hybrid elephant-mammoth calves born by 2028.
2028, that's like tomorrow. We are talking about seeing a mammoth calf on the news in just a few years. But it isn't just giant Ice Age herbivores, right? They're also working on a predator called the thylacine, better known as the Tasmanian tiger.
The thylacine is a fascinating candidate for this. It was native to Australia and Tasmania. It looked incredibly striking, almost like a lean, sandy-colored wolf, but with these sharp, dark tiger stripes running across its lower back.
I've seen old black and white photos of them. They look so strange.
They do. But it wasn't a dog or a cat. It was a marsupial, meaning it carried its young in a pouch, just like a kangaroo.
Oh, right.
But European settlers relentlessly hunted them down to protect their sheep, and the last known thylacine died shivering in a concrete zoo enclosure in 1936.
It's so sad.
Yay.
But because 1936 is so recent, evolutionarily speaking, the research shows scientists have been able to map basically 99.9% of its entire biological manual.
Yes, the blueprint was incredibly well preserved.
They used this beautifully preserved 110-year-old skull that had just been sitting in a museum collection. But here is where my brain completely broke trying to understand the logistics.
Okay, what part?
Well, to use the cut and paste method, you need a living relative to act as the base model and the surrogate mother, right? For the mammoth, you use an elephant. Makes perfect sense.
Right.
But for this wolf-sized predator, they're using an animal called the fat-tailed dunnart.
It is a phenomenal little creature.
But it's tiny.
Ah.
I looked up a picture of the fat-tailed dunnart. Looks exactly like a mouse with big ears. How on earth do you take the genetic blueprint of a mouse, paste in the traits of a wolf, and then expect a mouse-sized surrogate mother to give birth to an apex predator without literally bursting?
I know, it sounds like complete biological absurdity until you understand the mechanics of marsupial reproduction.
Okay, enlighten me.
Unlike placental mammals like humans or elephants or dogs, marsupials do not carry their babies inside the womb until they are fully formed. A marsupial pregnancy is incredibly short.
How short are we talking?
Very short. The baby is born in a highly underdeveloped, almost embryonic state. Even a massive red kangaroo gives birth to a baby the size of a jelly bean.
Oh, wow, a
Wow.
jelly bean. So they were basically just birthing a tiny pink speck.
Exactly. That tiny jelly bean then has to instinctively crawl up the mother's fur, crawl into her pouch, latch onto a milk source, and do all of its major growing on the outside.
Oh, okay, that makes so much more sense now.
Right. So the tiny fat-tailed dunnart only has to act as a surrogate mother for the very first microscopic stage of development. Once the engineered thylacine baby is born, they will just transfer it into an artificial pouch in the lab to finish growing.
That is just brilliant problem solving.
And the scientists are currently tweaking the dunnart's instruction manual to enlarge its jaw structure, give it those iconic stripes, and dramatically increase its adult size to match the thylacine.
Honestly, it blows my mind. But when we look at the avian side of things, like birds, it seems like that clever problem solving hits a brick wall.
Birds present a very unique challenge.
The research talks heavily about bringing back the dodo, which was famously wiped out by sailors on the island of Mauritius in the 1660s, and the passenger pigeon. But why are birds so much harder to engineer than a mammoth or a wolf?
Because a bird egg is basically a biological fortress.
A fortress.
Think about it. With a mammal, you are working with soft tissue. You can sedate a surrogate, extract an egg, use your molecular scissors under a microscope, and implant it back into the warm, fluid environment of a womb.
Right. It's accessible.
But you cannot do that with a hard-shelled egg. By the time a bird lays an egg with a hard shell, the fertilization has already happened and the embryo is already multiplying. You can't just drill a hole in the shell, inject some edited mammoth-style blueprint into the yolk, tape it back together, and stick it under a heat lamp.
That would just make a mess. So how did they bypass the fortress? Because the updates from 2025 say they actually figured it out.
They bypassed the egg entirely by going upstream to the parents. Yes. Scientists made an astonishing breakthrough by figuring out how to isolate and edit what are called primordial germ cells inside living birds.
Okay, what are those?
These are the specific cells inside a pigeon that eventually turn into its sperm and eggs.
Oh, so they aren't editing the bird itself, they're editing the biological hardware the bird uses to reproduce.
Exactly. They take a beautiful iridescent bird called the Nicobar pigeon, which happens to be the dodo's closest living relative.
Okay.
They extract these germ cells, use the molecular scissors to paste in the ancient dodo traits, making it larger, flightless, changing its beak shape, and then inject those edited germ cells back into the pigeon.
And the pigeon is just fine.
That pigeon looks totally normal. It's still a Nicobar pigeon, but when that pigeon mates, the sperm or eggs it produces carry the instructions for a dodo proxy.
Wow.
So the next generation hatches with the engineered traits.
That is a staggering level of biological manipulation. Which honestly brings us right back to the hook we opened with. Because while we talk about mammoths in 2028 and dodos hatching from pigeons in the future, something massive already happened.
April 2025.
Exactly.
Oh.
Colossal announced the birth of 3 engineered dire wolf pups, Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi.
The dire wolf It has been gone for 10 millennia. It was the undisputed apex predator of North America during the Pleistocene epoch.
I mean, we've all seen Game of Thrones, but these were real animals.
Very real, and much larger than a modern gray wolf. They had this incredibly robust skeleton and jaws, specifically designed to crush the bones of giant sloths and prehistoric horses.
And scientists just took the blueprint of a modern gray wolf, pasted in the ancient instructions for that massive bone-crushing size, and created living proxies.
Living, breathing pack hunters that are currently growing in a secure facility as we speak.
Which means we really have to stop talking about de-extinction as some far-off sci-fi concept for the year 2050. The timeline is now. A predator from the Ice Age is literally pacing around an enclosure today.
It really shifts the entire conversation.
It does, and that brings up the most urgent question of this entire deep dive. Why?
That is the billion-dollar question.
Literally. Why are tech billionaires and venture capitalists pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into making Jurassic Park a reality? Because it can't just be about creating insanely expensive zoo exhibits, right?
No, it isn't about zoos at all. If you read the foundational philosophy driving these companies, it is entirely about ecosystem mechanics.
Ecosystem mechanics.
Yes. They view de-extinction as the ultimate weapon against ecological collapse.
Okay, so the analogy in the research that really made this click for me is the game of Jenga.
The Jenga tower is a great visual for this.
Right, so imagine any natural environment like a forest, a tundra, a coral reef as a massive complex Jenga tower. Every single animal, plant, and fungus is a block holding the tower up. And for millions of years, the tower was remarkably stable.
Very stable.
But then humanity arrived. And when we overhunted the mammoth or destroyed the Silencine's habitat, we didn't just pluck a decorative block from the very top of the tower. We ripped out massive load-bearing blocks from the foundation.
And as a direct result of that, the tower is swaying. It is violently wobbling in the wind.
So how does de-extinction fix it?
The core argument for de-extinction is that we must carefully slide a functional proxy block back into those exact empty spaces to stabilize the tower before the whole thing crashes down.
And the most dramatic example of this from the sources is the woolly mammoth and its relationship to the Arctic permafrost. I think most people, myself included, just view mammoths as big, hairy elephants that walked around in the snow.
That's the common perception, yeah.
But ecologically, they were the architects of their environment. They were basically 10-ton living snowplows.
To really understand this, you have to picture what the Arctic looked like during the Ice Age. It wasn't just a barren, mossy wasteland like it is today.
No.
No. It was covered in a vast, highly reflective grassland called the mammoth steppe. And the mammoths were the gardeners of this steppe. Because they were so massive as they roamed, they constantly knocked down dark-colored trees and crushed thick shrubs.
Which allowed the light-colored grasses to flourish.
Exactly.
And more importantly, the research highlights what they did in the dead of winter. To find food, herds of mammoths constantly stomped, scraped, and compacted the thick layers of snow to get to the grass buried underneath.
And this is where the climate change aspect comes in. Think about the physical properties of snow. A thick layer of fluffy, undisturbed snow acts as a powerful insulating blanket.
Right, like an igloo. It actually traps heat in the ground.
Exactly. But by constantly trampling and packing down that snow blanket, the mammoths removed the insulation. They exposed the earth directly to the brutal, freezing winter air.
So they were basically keeping the freezer door open.
That's a great way to put it. This constant freezing kept the soil, the permafrost, frozen solid all year round, even during the brief summer months. But when humans wiped out the mammoths, the gardeners were gone.
So the trees grew back.
The dark trees and shrubs grew back, which absorbed the sun's heat rather than reflecting it like the grass did. And that thick snow blanket isn't being trampled anymore, so it insulates the ground from the deep winter freeze.
And because of this lack of maintenance, combined with human-driven global warming, the permafrost is rapidly melting.
And the permafrost melting is a catastrophic problem. It is a ticking carbon bomb.
Carbon bomb? That sounds bad.
It's terrible. The permafrost isn't just frozen dirt. It is a graveyard. It holds massive, incomprehensible amounts of dead plants and animal carcasses from thousands of years ago that never rotted because they were locked in ice.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If that permafrost melts, all that organic matter begins to rot simultaneously. It'll release massive plumes of trapped carbon dioxide and methane. Some estimates suggest a total permafrost melt would release more greenhouse gases than all the forests on Earth combined.
Wow. So the grand plan is to take these new mammoth proxies and release herds of them into places like Pleistocene Park in Siberia.
Right.
And the hope is that their sheer size and biological instincts will just kick in. They will start knocking down trees, trampling the snow, restoring the grasslands, and acting as a massive biological shield, locking that carbon bomb back in the freezer.
It is planetary engineering using biology instead of machines.
It's just wild.
But the financial backers will also point out that the massive investment in de-extinction isn't just about bringing back the dead.
Right. There are side benefits.
Exactly. The exact tools they are inventing to build a mammoth are being deployed right now to save animals that are barely clinging to life.
This is a huge revelation for me in the sources. The technology doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Once you perfect the molecular scissors, you can use them on anything.
Anything with a biological manual.
Right. For example, using the reproductive technology pioneered for these extinct animals, researchers recently cloned a critically endangered red ghost wolf down in Texas.
That was a massive success story.
They took a preserved cell from a red wolf and successfully cloned it to inject genetic diversity back into a population that was functionally dying out.
And it doesn't stop there. In Australia, they are using the cut and paste method on an animal called the quoll.
The quoll. Okay, what's its deal?
It's this small, spotted, carnivorous marsupial. But the problem is Australia is currently overrun by invasive cane toads, which are highly toxic. The quolls keep eating the toads and dying.
Oh, man. So they're just poisoning themselves.
Exactly. So scientists are using molecular scissors to tweak the quoll's biological manual, pasting in a natural resistance to the toad toxin.
So they're giving an endangered animal a biological software update to prevent it from going extinct.
That's exactly what it is, a software update. And there is also a massive initiative in the United Arab Emirates. They are partnering directly with Colossal to build a high-tech biovault.
Like a futuristic Noah's Ark.
Basically, they are systematically collecting and deep freezing the genetic blueprints of incredibly vulnerable animals, starting with the Arabian leopard.
Just in case.
Just in case. The philosophy is shifting. If the Arabian leopard vanishes in the wild next year, it is a tragedy, sure, but it is no longer permanent. The tools and the blueprints are safely locked in a vault, ready to print a new generation.
The de-extinction toolkit is rapidly becoming the ultimate safety net for modern conservation. But, as with any profound technological leap, we are rapidly approaching a massive ethical intersection. And looking at the sources, the check engine light is flashing bright red on the dashboard.
It is definitely time to pull back the curtain on the pushback, because independent ethicists and biologists are raising alarms that we simply cannot ignore.
So let's start with pure animal welfare. We talked about using the Asian elephant as a surrogate mother for an experimental mammoth hybrid. But the Asian elephant is itself an endangered, highly intelligent, socially complex animal.
It is?
So aren't we putting a threatened species at extreme risk just to satisfy our own scientific curiosity?
That is the exact question bioethicists are raising. And the data absolutely validates their concern. Whether you are using the photocopy method or the cut and paste method, the failure rate for engineered embryos is staggering.
Like, how bad is it?
Very high. Mammals carrying these modified pregnancies suffer dramatically higher rates of miscarriage. The hormonal strain on the surrogate mother is immense, and sometimes her own health is permanently compromised.
And even when a pregnancy is successful, we know exactly what happened to the Pyrenean ibex. 7 minutes of agonizing suffocation.
Right. The grim reality is that heavily edited animals often suffer from premature aging, severe organ deformities, or respiratory failures.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking.
It is. And beyond the physical toll, we have to consider the psychological reality of what we are actually creating. Let's go back to Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, those 3 dire wolf pups born last year.
Like the apex predator.
By their very genetic design, they are apex predators. They are wired to roam hundreds of miles, hunt massive prey, and exist within complex, hierarchical social packs.
They aren't meant to be indoor pets.
Exactly. Keeping them in a sterile, secure laboratory enclosure, no matter how many enrichment toys they have, raises massive moral questions about their quality of life. Are we engineering these magnificent creatures just to condemn them to life as solitary test subjects?
That is a heavy question.
Yeah.
And let's say the long-term goal actually works. We don't keep them in a lab, we open the gates and release a herd of mammoth proxies onto the tundra or a pack of dire wolves into the forest. That triggers the second major alarm bell in the research. the invasive species threat.
This is a huge concern for ecologists.
We are talking about reintroducing animals that have been gone for 10,000 years. The world didn't stop spinning when they died. The rivers changed course, the plant life evolved, the climate shifted.
And more importantly, the modern ecosystem has entirely adapted to their absence. If you drop a mammoth proxy into the modern Arctic, it has no natural predators.
Nothing is big enough to eat it.
Right. It possesses no built-in immunities to modern viral or bacterial diseases. And conversely, the modern environment has no defenses against the ancient microbes the mammoth might be hosting.
So it could start a plague.
It's possible. Critics heavily warn that instead of sliding a block back into the Jenga tower to stabilize it, a resurrected species could act like a giant, fuzzy, invasive weed. It could completely overrun and obliterate the fragile modern food webs that have established themselves over the last 10 millennia.
Which leads us directly into what the sources call the moral hazard. And this is arguably the most insidious risk of all.
The moral hazard is fascinating from a psychological perspective.
Right. If humanity proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we can bring an animal back from the dead, does society instantly become incredibly lazy about protecting the animals that are currently alive?
It's a very real risk.
Like, do we stop fighting to save the Amazon rainforest because politicians or corporations say, hey, if the jaguar goes extinct, don't worry about it. We have its blueprint in the biovault. We'll just print a new jaguar when the logging is done.
It is a profound psychological trap, and we have seen this exact dynamic play out with climate change and carbon capture technology.
Oh, sure. We'll fix it later.
Exactly. The promise of a future technological fix is often used as a convenient excuse to avoid making hard sacrifices today. And the terrifying thing about this moral hazard is that it isn't theoretical. It is already actively altering the political and legal landscape.
Right. And there's a specific example of this in the sources.
Yes. Let me highlight a specific example from the congressional records provided in our research. And it is crucial to state that we are looking at this purely as a sociological phenomenon regarding how lawmakers react to new science. We are not endorsing or criticizing the politics themselves.
Absolutely. We are just looking at the ripple effects of the technology.
So during a tense congressional hearing in 2025 regarding environmental protections, U.S. Representative Lauren Boebert was arguing in favor of removing federal endangered species protections for the modern gray wolf.
Okay.
During her argument, she explicitly cited Colossal's breakthrough with the dire wolf. She argued that since private industry had just successfully brought back a wolf that had been dead for 10,000 years, the federal government no longer needed to aggressively regulate the protection of current wolves.
Wow.
Her logic was that if things get too bad for the gray wolf, we possess the technology to simply bring them back, along with woolly mammoths and whatever else we need.
I mean, setting the fierce debate over wolf conservation aside, that quote is the absolute embodiment of the moral hazard.
It truly is.
The shiny, futuristic promise of de-extinction is instantly weaponized to justify abandoning the expensive, messy, difficult work of preserving natural habitats today. Like, why force a lucrative mining operation to halt to save a rare owl if biotech promises a lag-grown owl a decade from now?
The science is accelerating at a velocity that completely shatters our existing legal frameworks. The laws written in the 1970s simply cannot comprehend the reality of a lab-grown Ice Age predator.
Which brings us to the bizarre reality of environmental law today. We are entering a legal Wild West, and the first massive battleground is over intellectual property. Like, who actually owns a mammoth?
This is where things get really complicated.
This genuinely blew my mind. The research notes that Colossal Biosciences is actively attempting to patent their edited elephants. Now, under normal legal precedent, you cannot walk into a patent office and patent a product of nature, right? You can't claim intellectual property over a blue jay or a pine tree or a naturally occurring elephant.
But here is the multi-billion-dollar loophole. Because these proxy animals are created using the cut-and-paste method, they are riddled with what lawyers call synthetic traits.
Synthetic traits, so human-made additions.
Exactly. A tropical elephant with genetic edits for shaggy hair and antifreeze blood does not exist anywhere in nature. Because human hands, using molecular scissors, consciously designed that specific biological instruction manual, the biotech companies can legally argue that the creature is an invention.
So we are looking at a future where a private for-profit corporation could literally own the genetic rights, the intellectual property, of entire herds of wild animals roaming the Siberian tundra.
Yes.
So if a poacher shoots one, is it a crime against nature or a copyright infringement?
It creates an absolute nightmare for wildlife law.
I want to pose a direct hypothetical based on the research then. Let's say it's 2028. A mammoth proxy steps out of the lab and into a national forest. Does the U.S. Endangered Species Act protect it?
The law is completely paralyzed by that function right now. You have two violently opposing legal interpretations.
Okay, what's the first one?
On one hand, you could argue that the woolly mammoth is an extinct native species. Therefore, by bringing it back, it should immediately be granted total, uncompromising federal protection as an endangered animal.
That seems logical enough.
But on the other hand, a strict reading of the law looks at this proxy and says, no, this is an Asian elephant, a non-native species, that has been aggressively genetically modified in a laboratory.
Oh, I see the problem.
Right. Legally speaking, that classifies it as an exotic genetically modified organism.
And in many jurisdictions, if you introduce an exotic genetically modified organism into the wild, the government isn't just allowed to eradicate it. They are legally mandated to hunt it down and destroy it to protect native wildlife from contamination.
Exactly. So the very legal framework designed to protect endangered species might actually require the federal government to exterminate the mammoth simply because it is technically an invasive lab hybrid.
It is a massive, unresolved legal paradox.
And where there is legal confusion, there is intense financial friction. The final major controversy surrounding this entire endeavor is the allocation of money.
Right, the funding. Because traditional conservationists look at the massive influx of capital like $615 million for mammoths and dire wolves, and they are furious.
They are very frustrated.
Traditional conservation is desperately, chronically underfunded. Critics point out that $500 million could physically save thousands of living, breathing species right now. We are talking about frogs, birds, and vital insects that are losing their habitats to bulldozers today.
Not a decade from now. Today.
Right. So they argue that spending a fortune to print a fake mammoth while the Amazon burns is a grotesque misallocation of resources?
It is a powerful argument, but the proponents of de-extinction push back incredibly hard on the idea that this is a zero-sum game.
How so?
They argue that the money funding Colossal and similar labs is not being siphoned away from the World Wildlife Fund's charity drives. This capital is coming from Silicon Valley venture capitalists, tech billionaires, and high-profile celebrities.
Ah, right. The sources specifically mention that people like filmmaker Peter Jackson and former NFL quarterback Tom Brady are pouring millions of dollars into this research.
Yes.
And the brutal reality is that Tom Brady was probably not going to donate $10 million to save a specific ugly species of swamp frog.
Most likely not.
The argument is that the sci-fi appeal of de-extinction is attracting new money into the biological sciences, money that would have otherwise been spent on, a new social media app or cryptocurrency.
And that leads us to the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, because at this point, you might be thinking, this is fascinating, but how does an engineered wolf in Texas or a mammoth in Siberia actually affect my life?
It's a fair question to ask.
But if we step back and look at the vast scope of this research, it fundamentally rewrites the story of humanity's role on Earth.
I think so too. For centuries, humanity has played the role of the meteor. We have been this blind, catastrophic force of nature, paving over ancient habitats, altering the climate, and wiping out species after species.
We've been the destroyers.
Exactly. But what we are witnessing in these labs is humanity attempting to transition into the mechanic. We are realizing we broke the engine of the planet, and now we are using our most advanced, godlike tools to open up the hood and try to manually fix the damage we caused.
And whether you are thrilled by the prospect of a mammoth returning or terrified by the arrogance of it, you must pay attention to this technology.
Because it's not going to stop at elephants.
Exactly. Because the molecular scissors being perfected right now to paste mammoth traits into an elephant embryo are not going to remain confined to animal conservation. The exact same technology is being rapidly refined in these de-extinction labs are laying the groundwork for the future of human existence.
How so?
They will eventually be used in human medicine to literally edit out genetic diseases before a child is born. They will be used in agriculture to engineer crops that can survive the severe droughts brought on by climate change.
So this is way bigger than a woolly mammoth.
Vastly bigger. You are not just listening to a quirky story about bringing back a dodo bird. You are watching the dawn of an entirely new era of biological mastery.
It is like giving a toddler a blowtorch.
Yeah.
The profound power to create and the terrifying power to destroy, all sitting in a petri dish in Dallas, Texas.
It's an incredible responsibility. And before we close out today's mission, I want to leave you with one final haunting thought pulled directly from the ethical debates in our sources.
Okay, lay it on us.
We talked about how scientists mapped a 110-year-old skull to completely rebuild the genetic manual of the Tasmanian tiger. We talked about how they successfully rebuilt a dire wolf from fragments that were 10,000 years old.
Right.
If the technology exists to do that today, what happens tomorrow when we inevitably perfectly map the DNA of our own extinct human relatives, like the Neanderthals?
Oh, wow. That is a terrifying leap.
The sources explicitly note that applying this cut-and-paste technology to high cognitive hominids crosses an unimaginable ethical boundary. If the tools exist to build a mammoth proxy out of an elephant, they absolutely exist to build a Neanderthal proxy out of modern human DNA.
I don't even know what to say to that.
If we did that, we would be creating beings with high intelligence, deep self-awareness, and a profound capacity for emotional suffering. Would they be granted human rights? Would they be considered citizens of the country they were born in? Or, because they possess synthetic traits engineered by a corporation, would they be classified as patented corporate property?
That is just chilling.
We are rushing at breakneck speed to bring back the past, but we might be utterly unprepared to look it in the eye when it finally returns. Something to mull over as you go about your day.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and see you on the next Dives.